Okay, all right. Hey, can you guys see me okay? Is there enough light in here? Um, okay, hang on. Let me just get a little bit more light, and then I'll go ahead and get going on this video here. Okay, oh, that's right. Okay, all right. There we go. That's much better. All right. Well, hey, it's me, Profesor here, and I want to go ahead and say a few things about your first readings in the Daughter of Fortune story. And I'm gonna be doing this after each week of reading. So basically, this is a bit of a recap of some of the main themes, main events, key topics, character development, and of course tying into what's happening with California history as the course of the story unfolds. So by this time, you should have read chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Daughter of Fortune. And even though Isabel Allende doesn't list the chapter numbers. These are the chapters that correspond to the chapters Eliza, the English, and let me just get my little iPad here with my notes, and Senoritas. Um, and um, of course, I'll have a little bit more discussion about other events, and of course, I'll say a few more things about the video portion. So probably, if not next week, then for sure, probably about the week after. As we're about halfway done with the Daughter of Fortune story, then I'll go ahead and say more things about the video portion and what that entails. So by now, all of you should have a pretty good sense of what to do with the discussion forums. You've got the preview video already set, recorded on the Camtasia software, telling you what you need to do in order to choose a question, reply to my opening threads first. Let me know which questions you want to do. Wait for me to say, okay, absolutely, go for it, andale, it's all yours, blah blah blah. Um, so far, I'm seeing some earlier requests for questions for the questions you want to do. So definitely keep that going. And by the end of this week, or actually more into the beginning of next week, so we've got the holiday weekend. Then please start putting in your comments, groups 1, 2, and 3 for chapters 1, 2, and 3 respectively. All right. Well, I don't think I need to say too much more about the administrative and nuts and bolts stuff. I pretty much covered that in the previous two videos on the story. So let me go ahead now and say a few things about what's happening in chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then provide a little bit more context in terms of what's happening in California around this period. Well, first off, Isabel Allende is one of the foremost authors in Latin American literature, and in fact, she lives in Northern California. She's lived in I think out in Marin County for the better part of about 20 plus years. So if you have of course, if you have the paperback copy, there is a bit of a discussion about her story, her background, her interests, her literary style in the appendix at the end of the story. In fact, she was in the news last holiday season, during the holiday season, when President Obama had the I think it was the Kennedy or the Lincoln honors, and she was one of the recipients, along with a host of others. There are quite a few other famous individuals whose names escape me, but I do recall that Isabel was one of the recipients. Uh, she's definitely a prolific writer. I think you definitely put her in the category with other foremost Latin American authors, whether it's people like the master himself, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Mario Vargas Llosa from Peru, uh, Carlos Fuentes from Mexico, Octavio Paz, another legendary Mexican author, Ariel Dorfman from Chile, and like many of those authors, Isabel has been a fan proponent of this idea of magical realism. Garcia Marquez was the master of that, but Allende does a pretty good job of matching that in her previous works, especially her classic work, The House of the Spirits. But I think what makes Daughter of Fortune really interesting is that Allende seems to get away from this idea of magical realism, that is the focus on dreams. Uh, yes, when it comes to dreams and aspirations, you definitely see that as the story unfolds in terms of what Eliza, the heroine, wants to do, in terms of what Dao, her friend from China, wants to do, and of course we have the crazy guy Jacob Todd, who seems to be just a total dreamer. Um, he's constantly going from job to job. Can't really sit still. He's got this restless spirit. But I think in the long run, Jacob Todd is a perfect metaphor for the people coming into California who have this restless spirit. And as the gold rush is unfolding, which we'll see more about in the next week, in the next next week or so. Um, People coming into California had this notion that they had to get there, that it was instant wealth. You know, much like with all the brouhaha over that Powerball, that Super Lotto jackpot, whatever that thing is called, coming over about almost about 400 million. So in a sense, the hysteria about the Powerball now, that's the way many people felt toward California at the end of the 1840s. And as the late California historian J.S. Holiday pointed out, the whole world rushed into California, and the whole world indeed rushed in. You had Mexicans, you had Chinese, of course, Americans, and Americans from all parts of the country. Of course, people from the Midwest, people from the Northeast, many people from the South, from Texas. Uh, you had people coming in from Chile. You had people coming in from Russia, from Hungary, from Japan, from Hawaii. So when Holiday made the observation that the whole world rushed in, the whole world indeed rushed in. And as you read further on into Daughter Fortune, you really get more and more of a sense of it. In terms of an overriding theme, I guess the main takeaway as you're reading this, I think what Allende is trying to demonstrate, and as the story unfolds, she's got a very keen grasp of history. So as you go on in the story, she gives you a good sense of what's happening in terms of, well, this is what's happening in California history at this time, this is what's happening in Chile at this time, this is what's happening in Europe at this time, this is what's happening in China at this time. So at various intervals of the story, she does pause and give you a sense of a historical context to really have a focus or a backdrop to understand the scope of the story. But I think the main takeaway about the idea of Daughter of Fortune is that Allende really pushes the idea of reinventing oneself. And anybody who came to California in the 1840s, early 1850s, whether they were escaping whether it was rough conditions, whether it was in New York State, whether in Louisiana, Georgia, or they were escaping political persecution in China, like Dao from the story is, or whether they're trying to get away from bad marriages, bad debts, getting away from their family life, as legendary John Sutter did, the one who established the fort or the ranch in which the first gold strike was announced by James Marshall in 1848. So they had all these crazy and wacky, wild characters just trying to escape where they were, but they find a new life. They find a new sense of being. So I think all in all, the idea that the United States holds near and dear of here in America, you can come from wherever you are and start a new life, reinvent yourself. You can be what you want to be, that type of thing. It seems that California, since the founding of the state, since the state was established in 1850, really seems to epitomize that. That is, it doesn't matter what your background is. You come to California and you can pretty much be what you want to be. And I think that's the dominant theme that overrides the course of stories. So whether it's Dow, whether it's Eliza, whether it's Jacob Todd, whether it's Joe Bonecrusher, the madam you'll meet much later on in the story, um, or whether it's Paulina Rodriguez, the other strong female figure who becomes a powerful business person. She reinvents herself too. So that's a very important theme to keep in mind. So as you're going through it, keep all that in mind. And when you make your videos, you might want to have that in the back of your mind and really give you a sense of a motivation to to build up your character and announce why it is you want to go to California. But of course, I'll say a lot more about the video stuff in just about a couple of weeks down the road. Okay, enough of the preliminaries here. Let me go ahead and give you a quick review of what's happening in chapters 1, 2, and 3. And let me get my little iPad mini here with all my notes on it, and we can go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, the screen froze a little bit here. Okay, the story begins. The first chapter is called Eliza, and of course, Eliza Summers is the name of the heroine. And you've already met Eliza. That is the family that took Eliza in. We have the Summers. We have the two brothers, John Jeremy, and of course the sister Rose. Rose, in essence, is like the main mother figure for Eliza. But we also meet the other mother figure too. That of course is Mama Frezia. And right off the bat, Mama Frezia is a person who doesn't take any crap from anybody, for lack of a better term. She tells it like it is. So while the Summers family, especially Rose and Jeremy, have the sense that they want to try to recreate Victorian English life in Chile, it's Mama Fresa, in essence, who brings Eliza back onto earth. No, 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 mijita. No, 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 my dear. That's not the way it works. This is the way it works. So we see that already, that clash between Victorian English morals that the Summers family represents. Also, but contrast that too with this notion of earth goddesses, people from the earth, the humble people, and that's what Mama Fezia represents. So Eliza is caught between those two worlds, and for the most part, Chile back in those days really seemed to be in that type of mode. In that first the Spaniards, of course, who colonized it, and then when the English came in and brought a lot of their industry, their banking, uh, a lot of their institutions, as you see in the story, into Chile. So while parts of Chile tried to, in essence, try to modernize, join the modern world, the era of globalization back in those days, in many respects, Chile's character is rooted in the earth, especially with the native Mapuche and the Araucanian Indians. These were the fierce warrior peoples that the Spaniards had a tough time fighting against for centuries. It seemed. Uh, Spanish crown had to keep sending garrisons of soldiers try to combat these native peoples. If the Spaniards thought that the Aztecs were tough in Mexico or the Incas were tough in Peru, these guys were, you might say, small potatoes compared to how mean and tough the Mapuche and the Araucanian Indians were. And you're going to get a sense of that in terms of the character of the native populations of Chile as the story progresses. Okay, let me take my glass off so I can read a little bit better my notes here. Okay, so right off the bat, you got a sense of the characters of who is who in the Summers family. Then we meet Jacob Todd, as I mentioned a few months ago. He was sort of a wheeler dealer, kind of a wanderlust guy. He really didn't know what he wanted to do for himself, but he ends up in Chile in the port of Valparaiso, and for the rest of the story, it seems Rose Summers. Becomes the object of his desires, his passions for the rest of the story. But Rose shows no interest, no interest. But you got to give Jacob credit. You can't blame a man for trying. And Jacob certainly does that. One of the things that we see throughout the course of the story is this disdain toward organized religion. In chapter one, we get a sense of how Allende, through John Summers, talks about the disdain toward Protestantism, uh, complaining about what was called what's referred to in the story as a tyrannical God. But Catholics, you might say, um, don't get off the easy too. At certain points of the story, Allende, through other characters, talks about her disdain towards structured Catholicism. It seems that Allende is more interested with supernatural beings, contact with uh, natural spirits, earth goddesses, things of this nature. So we see it time and time again in the person of Mama Fresia, you might say, indicative of the earth mother, earth goddess spirits. Okay, and then at the end of chapter one, we see where Jacob also notices the disparities between the rich and the poor. So clashes between the have and the have-nots. That's another theme that we see throughout the course of the story. All right, chapter two is the English, and um, and more of the focus here is what happens to Jacob as he tries to make his way in this strange world in Chile. One of the interesting things that Ainda talks about is this event called the Cristo de Mayo procession, or the Christ of May procession. Um, Allende points out that at certain points in the country's history, depending on times of trouble, times of turbulence, a procession of a Christ figure goes through the streets, in essence, to try to turn the tide to restore the fortunes of the city after times of trials of tribulation. And of course, Chile, being along the Ring of Fire, was is prone to earthquakes. Of course, there was a devastating one not too long, about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Uh, other instances, other events. Ayana talks about things such as fires, or whether it's plagues, things of that nature. So you might say, going back to the earth, going back to these earth spirits, these native spirits, to try to help the situation, help the people, help the country. These are things which Allende talks about at various points, but she makes a point to introduce this notion here here in here in chapter two. Okay. At the end of chapter 2, we also meet the Del Valle family, and the Del Valles represent the infamous patron system that was established in Chile and much of South America and all of Latin America by the Spaniards. Basically, the way it worked was that you had a patron or patron who oversaw whether it was hacienda or a estancia, whether depending on what part of the what part of Latin America you were in. The Portuguese had a similar situation in Brazil as well. But you had the patron or the patron. He oversaw these vast expanses of land for agriculture, for cattle, and of course, the workers were more often than not the native Indians or the mestizo, the mixed race people. So Agustin del Valle represents that patron figure. You might say the boss man who oversees the hacienda. This system was really nasty in Mexico, and this is stuff which fed into the Mexican Revolution about 100 years ago. Uh, a lot of the other countries in Latin America didn't have the bloody revolution like Mexico did, but the social conditions that we saw in Mexico persisted in other parts of Latin America. And in the person of Agustin del Valle, he represents that old guard, fuddy-duddy type of mentality. And of course, part of that fuddy-duddy mentality is that uh, the patriarch, he knows everything. He knows what's best for the daughter. Protects the virginity, the modesty of the daughters. He decides uh, whom she can see, whom she's forbidden to see. And what happens is we have a character by the name of um, um, we have a character by the name of Feliciano, uh, Feliciano Rodriguez, and Feliciano was a person who Agustin didn't like very much, and actually we see a little bit more about that coming into chapter 3. So we get into chapter 3, and in chapter 3, Eliza is 13 years old. She's showing signs of womanhood. Also, at this point in time, in 1845, California in this period is finishing up the Mexican period. The U.S.-Mexico War was just on the verge of breaking out about a year after that. So a lot of political chaos in California in 1845 in terms of the split between the northern Californios, who were more pro U.S. in their sentiments, and the southern Californios, the Sureños, they were more, shall we say, pro Mexico in their sentiments. So Mexico, California at this point in time, even though it was part of the Mexican Republic for about 20 plus years by 1845, it had its own share of problems, some political divisions, splits between the North versus South, family rivalries, that type of thing. So it was really in a chaotic situation. You might say easy pickings for the U.S. To move it on the scene, which would eventually happen about a year or so down the road. And of course, we'll see more about that in some of the upcoming readings. But Eliza, she's curious about the world. She's fascinated by the stories of the Old Testament. She's interested in the advice that Mama Fresia gives her. She starts her menstrual cycles and but she's also fascinated by the stories of the sea. Uh, so John Summers, who she kind of sees in essence like an uncle. He's the one who you might say really introduces this a spirit of adventure, of idealism, which became a hallmark of hers for the rest of the story. And these were things which in essence Rose Summers and more so Jeremy Summers try to put a lid on. So already we're seeing that within the Summers family, because each person, whether it was John or Jeremy or Rose, had different ways of looking at things, and Eliza, in essence, was kind of caught in the middle in terms of which member of the Summers family she should follow in terms of in terms of trying to make her way through life. But Rose insists that Eliza become a proper woman, a proper English woman, a Victorian morals, mores, because keep in mind, everybody, this is the time of Queen Victoria in England. She ruled England for the better part of about 60 plus years. So so clearly, there's emphasis on being prim and proper, stiff upper lip, that type of thing. And Rose epitomized that and tried to instill those virtues to Eliza with things such as piano lessons, etiquette lessons, and stuff of that nature, as Ayana talks about in chapter 3. Um, and in chapter 3 too, Ayana talks about the advance in terms of the riches, the mining operations, because Chile became synonymous with mining, especially by the tail end of the 19th century. In fact, Chile's mining operations was a flashpoint for the political crisis that gripped Chile in the 1970s, and that's when Augusto Pinochet came into power with a bloody coup, which toppled her relative, her I wouldn't, not so much an uncle, but I think it's about a third or fourth cousin. That was Salvador Allende. So if you hear the term Allende, and you're thinking, I know Latin American history, Professor. Dr. Contreras talked about this in the 115 class. That's the relation. Isabel Allende and Salvador Allende. They're related, not closely, but about a third or fourth cousins, somewhere in that familial line. Okay. Finally, last thing I want to say about chapter 3 uh, is that here we begin to see where Jacob Todd really has a habit of inserting himself where he's not wanted, and he does it with the family drama of the Del Valle family. I mentioned Paulina. The father Agustin didn't like that Paulina was interested in this guy Feliciano. He tried to lock her up. Blah blah blah. Well, Jacob comes in. He intercedes, and to make a long story short, the romance that was forbidden between Paulina and Feliciano does get consummated at the end of chapter 3. Agustin del Valle is kind of in a position that he really can't say no to the to this match. But again, it's because of the interference of Jacob Todd. And it's going to be important for Jacob because Jacob's going to have some tough times as the story progresses. Uh, but uh, but Paulina and Feliciano will definitely don't forget that. And more so for Paulina, this begins the point where Paulina, like Eliza, she becomes a very strong central figure, but more so on a business mode. And I'm going to take that to the next level in that when I make my sample character video, I'm going to make Paulina my boss, my supervisor, my patrona, so to speak. And um, 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 and well, I won't give too much away right now. I'll say a lot more about this in a couple of weeks. But again, that's my point. That's how I'm going to insert myself in the story. That is, make my own character video, and then when you see my sample video, this should give you a sense of what I'm expecting when you make your respective videos. But again, more about that in the next couple of weeks. Okay, I hope this video helped, gave you a sense of some of the themes, the characters, events happening in a little bit in California, but more so in Chile, in England, in Europe at this time. Um, next week, of course, I'll have a video in which I preview, in which I review the events which happened from chapters four through 7. Um, um, the same type of theme, same type of format. I'll definitely have for you then. I'm not sure if I'll record here in my office, but if it's a nice day, then maybe I'll record outside, and one of my fuzzy friends will decide to join us. Okay, all right. So hope you're liking the story so far. It's definitely one of my favorites, and the History 101 class seemed to really take to the story and and the discussions, and more so the videos, and I'm hoping the same applies here. Okay, everyone, that's it from here, and I'll talk to you guys again next week to review, to recap chapters 4 through 7.